Hey, everybody. Welcome to this month's Azure Container Apps community live stream. I'm joined by Sophia and Mike today. I want to say hi.
Hiya.
Howdy. Good day.
Yeah, we had a very busy month at Azure Container Apps in the month of August. So we have a lot to go through today. We had about like 9 or 10 announcements, I think. So we're going to go through all those. We're going to cover some community links. You all have been producing some really great content, so we want to make sure that we feature them. And we're also going to have some demos. So pretty packed edition of the live stream today. So thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in chat. And yeah, we're just going to get started. All right, so just like every month, we published a Container Apps newsletter. And if you need access to that, let me put the link up on the screen here. It's aka.ms/containerapps/newsletter. And there we're going to, we cover basically all the community highlights that we found, any upcoming events, as well as product news. And these are also the same things that we're going to go over today. So here we go. Let's get started. So here are some links. I've already opened them. And yeah, so the first one is from Haroon. They actually went through and covered 5 of the features that we announced earlier in the month of August. So if you kind of want to get a kind of third-party view of this from somebody in the community to kind of see what these features can do and all that, check out this blog post. And here's one here that maybe Sophia can jump in and cover.
Yeah, so there was a Reactor Summer series that did a series on containers and Kubernetes services. Carrie and I did a presentation on the first part of the series about container apps, doing a really simple demo and talking through how exactly to go through and add a container app site. So yeah, it was super fun. There's, I guess, the links in the newsletter if you want to watch long.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a whole hour of container apps. Nice. Yep. And next we have...
Can't beat an hour of container apps. I mean, come on.
Yeah, you can. We can do 2 hours of container apps.
There you go. That's good. Alrighty. All
right. So Prabhas published an article on how to use the MQTT bindings in Dapper with .NET 6 and container apps. I actually didn't even know that we had MQTT bindings in Dapper. So that's pretty cool. And it's a very long article going through pretty much all the steps and how you would set that up. So it's pretty cool. Check it out.
Awesome.
Yeah. And here we have Anatoly with an article about how to create a Discord bot in Azure Container Apps. I believe they even go into hooking this up to ChatGPT, maybe. Yeah, there we go.
That's neat.
Yeah, so yeah, a pretty cool and interesting article here about how to do that. And here, it's a multi-part series from Zenti. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Sorry about that. And this particular part here is how to use Terraform to create scaling rules in Azure Container Apps. So again, they go through in some very fine details on how to actually do all of this in Container Apps using Terraform. And Anthony from our OSS developer support put together an article on how to troubleshoot image pull errors in container apps. There's quite a few ways that that images can fail to pull from the registry in container apps, and basically what they outline here is all the steps that you can go through to kind of figure out which way that is failing and how to fix them. And this one here is a plug on my own blog. So we're actually one of the more popular, I guess, relatively. Blog posts that I've written in the past was about how to run Playwright and Puppeteer in Azure Functions. And a lot of people have been doing that pretty successfully to run kind of like Playwright in a serverless fashion. But it is pretty tricky to get working in Azure Functions. So I thought I'd kind of write a new article, an updated article on how to do that on container apps. So you can basically containerize your application so you can still use the functions runtime if you want to, or just have a regular app that uses Playwright or Puppeteer, and put that all into a container and then run that in container apps. And you still get a lot of the serverless benefits, like the serverless consumption billing, as well as the serverless scale that you can have with container apps. So hopefully that's a lot easier. So if you're having trouble running Playwright or Puppeteer in functions, check out Azure Container Apps to see if that works better for you.
Hey, Anthony, I'm not super familiar with Playwright. I probably should be. So what would be a one paragraph on what am I using Playwright for?
Yeah, so there's a couple of uses for Playwright. The primary use is if you want to do end-to-end testing through a browser. So if you don't want to go and click around your website, going to go over like 30 scenarios every time you make a small change, you can actually write a bunch of tests for it that use Playwright to actually basically do the clicking for you and validate that your site is still working. So that's one way. And then another way is you can use Playwright as as basically like a library that drives a headless browser. And what that's useful for is if you want to, for instance, like look at a website and kind of maybe like scrape some data from it.
Okay.
Or you might want to, kind of write some like tests on your own to kind of like click around a website, or take a screenshot, or turn and another kind of pretty popular use is if you want to kind of produce like a PDF invoice. You can basically render that in HTML, give that to Playwright, and then Playwright, and then basically a single method call will turn that into a PDF for you. So, yeah, it's a pretty cool library,
okay.
And yeah,
awesome.
I love it.
Thanks. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that.
No problem. All right, and I think in the next section of the newsletter, we go over some upcoming events. So there's a couple of upcoming events here. So one is Python Day. I think Hailey's going to jump on later on and actually talk about that. So I'll kind of save that for Hailey. We also have a couple of Ask the Experts sessions in the month of September as part of this Fall for Intelligent Apps event, or kind of video series, I think maybe. And that's happening on September 20th and 21st, depending on which time zone you're in. And we're actually running 2 sessions of it. So hopefully we can cover all the time zones, and you can join those. And I think you can ask experts questions. So we'll have folks from the team join, and yeah, we can answer all your hardest questions about container apps. Alrighty, and then next up, we're going to cover some product updates.
Yeah, so we have had a lot of updates in the last month that we're really excited to share. We've GA'd a lot of features, so we can go through and talk about them. We've kind of had 2 batches of them. We've announced a batch on the 16th and then announced another batch on the 30th. So first off, we've GA'd CORS, the cross-origin resource sharing in container apps. You can use it in Portal and CLI and everything. Next, we've GA'd init containers in container apps that you can do. Anthony, what are init containers exactly? I haven't looked into them too much.
Yeah, so init containers are containers in your container apps or in your container app jobs that can run before your main container starts. So you can think of them as ways of just kind of running some code before your main container starts. A lot of folks use it to making sure that the files and basically config files are kind of in the right place, especially if a config file needs to be generated from somewhere else, you can kind of create an init container to kind of create that config file or whatever your main container needs in the file system before it starts. You can also use it to have a container that checks to see whether or not a database is up, and then basically wait for the database to be up, or wait for the data to be migrated before your main container starts.
Neat.
Yeah, and just to point out, I mean, you can have multiple init containers. So you might want to stack them for certain reasons, and each one needs to run to completion, and then it will go through the list of init containers. Similar but different from the startup probes or the other probes that we do provide in Azure Container Apps and Kubernetes, but very similar. Yeah, pretty powerful.
I know that there's been some ask from the community about it, and so we're really happy to GA it. So yeah, going forward, we also have our secret volume mounts for container apps. We've GA'd that, so now you can mount secrets as volumes in container apps.
Hey, Sophia, if there's secret volume mounts, should we even be talking about them? Oh! Okay, I get one dad joke per session. That was it. And Hailey actually told me I needed to say that joke, so that was really Hailey's.
Okay, I guess we'll accept it, Mike. Unfortunately, now you always have to have a dad joke somewhere in there. As a little thing, when I was first starting with container apps, there was a whole conversation about secrets and secret volume mounts, and I did not know that secrets was like a feature and a thing. I thought they were talking about a literal secret. I had to ask. It sounded like there was this huge drama going on with the team of talking about this secret that they needed to work on. And it was like when I was first starting up, and I had no idea about all sorts of things in container apps. Before I figured out, oh, it's a feature. Oh, this is something that people use, then that's what it's called. Okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But yeah, so now we're GA'd, and that's awesome. And then next up, we've have session affinity for container apps. That's GA'd. So this is sticky sessions. That is another thing that people call it. It's being able to track the links that users can use. Anthony, you should probably correct me if I'm wrong. Being able to go to a specific link so that folks don't get sent to other spaces.
Yeah, you're going to get sent to the same instance of your container app. So if there's any, I hate to say it, but if there's any state, then it's gonna help you preserve that. So whenever possible, we'll send the request to the same instance of or replica of your container app. Of course, there could be exceptions. If that container goes down, we're not going to have that available. But this works really well for certain circumstances.
Awesome. Okie dokie. Next up, we have so Azure Key Vault references for secrets as well. So another secret update that's been GA'd. And yeah, so you can use Azure Key Vault references to access your secrets within container apps. So we're really trying to update and provide all sorts of different ways that you can use your secrets within container apps to make it really usable. Next up is kind of an announcement. We are retiring the Container Apps Preview API versions 2022 0601 and 2022 1101. So this will be retired, I want to say in November. If you click on the link, target retirement
there
November
well.
16th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just as a heads up for folks, if you're using these API versions, that it will get retired, and so you can switch over to our later API versions. Cool. And now for our August 30th ones, we have GA'd our dedicated plan. So now you can run apps on dedicated workload profiles and with that, we have a lot of additional offers for container apps. Mike, you've been working on this a lot, so I'm sure that you're very excited for it to be GA
Yes.
for folks to use.
Yes, the combination of the dedicated plan, which is a new plan. We've always offered our consumption plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about this during one of Anthony's demos. But yeah, the dedicated plan gives you a different billing model than the consumption plan. And it also provides you, in combination with the workload profiles that we'll talk about, opportunity to use customized hardware. If you need more memory or CPU, you can now do that to quite a large extent. And those workload profiles, those dedicated workload profiles, take advantage of the new dedicated plan and the pricing model. So very excited and very powerful for those that need larger container apps, or for those that are also just running container apps at a larger scale. Using some of the dedicated workload profiles can actually save money if you're running container apps at scale. I'll just say generically, and they're continuously running. So a couple reasons to look at the workload profiles. Yeah, thanks, Sophia. Very excited.
Yeah,
a lot of work from the whole team. Put in a lot of time on this one.
Yeah, we're really excited to get this out to be GA for folks to use in production and everything. Like, we've had it in public preview, and we were really trying to make sure that when it was in public preview, that we were making all the updates and making all of the any improvements that we're seeing in preview to get it to be GA.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next thing that we've announced is in public preview. So a new thing for folks to try out. Our container app supports additional TCP ports. So you can have multiple, your application can accept TCP supports TCP connections on multiple ports. And I know that this has been something that customers have been asking for and that we've had conversations around. So we're excited to have it be in public preview to see how folks use it. And then I think these are the last two. I'm not entirely sure. But we have, maybe one more. We've GA'd container apps to support UDR, NAT gateway, and smaller subnets. This is it within some of the workload profile plans, where you can use subnets as small as -27, I want to say. And you can do all sorts of things with this. We're trying to expand our how container apps is working and what we can provide for customers. Then in public preview, we are trying out the supporting environment level MTLS encryption. So you can encrypt traffic transmitted between applications within an environment using MTLS. So for folks doing lots of microservice stuff and they want communication between apps within an environment, you can use MTLS encryption for that.
And just to point out, Dapper is amazing, but for that, you don't have to use Dapper, right, Sophia, Anthony? You can get that encryption without necessarily using Dapper, although Dapper has a lot of benefits. So, yeah, and then and back on, if you don't mind scrolling one down, I didn't catch you in time, but for the UDR, that's something that, again, a lot of work and engineering from Tomer and Vinny and Hong and Jenny's team to really kind of revolutionize what we support from a network standpoint. Kerry couldn't be here. He's the PM owner for all things networking in ACA, whether he likes it or not. Just kidding. It's a really complex space, and he's great at simplifying it for everyone. But yeah, UDR gives you those user-defined routes. That in conjunction with setting up your own NAT and your own DNS allows you to really control the traffic, especially outbound, which was the big ask from customers, is they want all outbound traffic to go to one location, one IP. Many people have, I'm trying to think, network appliances that they want to use, and so this opens up all of those. And then, of course, smaller subnets. if you're familiar, we used to require a pretty large subnet for you to use your own custom VNet. And now we've reduced that tremendously. I'm not going to quote the numbers there. They're in the link, but it's gone down a lot, and it'll make it a lot easier for custom VNets. Sorry, Sophia, for interrupting.
No, you're good. Thanks for adding detail. It's really helpful. And then our final announcement is that we have GA'd Container Apps jobs. So you can run production workloads that perform a task for a finite duration, then exits. And you can schedule these workloads or run them in response to events. I think that's what our demo is going to be about, Anthony. So we can learn more about that. But we're really excited to have this be GA'd along with dedicated.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, before we get to the demos, looks like we have a couple of questions that we need to get to. Find out how this thing works. All right, so we have a question here about when config maps will be available. Yeah, so they were initially targeting, I think, this quarter. Realistically, I think we're looking at maybe in Q4, so by the end of this year. And the reason for that is we're trying to make sure that config maps, we can do it in a way that fits into container apps properly, and we're not just bringing a Kubernetes feature to container apps just for the sake of bringing that feature from Kubernetes to container apps. So,
yeah. In fact, Anthony, it'd be great probably if I'm going to struggle with this gentleman's name or this person's name. I'm sorry, Andres. I'm just going to stop there. But if you want to reach out to Anthony or I about how you want to use config maps and what's your specific need, that'd be really great. And the sooner you could do that, the better. You can do that through our GitHub, or I think our email addresses are somewhat known. So,
yeah, I want to say we have an item in our roadmap about config maps. I'm trying to look that up.
We do.
too.
I'm just looking for a little first-hand customer, how you want to use it and why, and that'd be great. So reach out to us. Let us know. Make sure we design this right. And I say we, I mean Anthony. So blame him if it's not. Just kidding. That wasn't a dad joke, by the way. I stuck to one.
All right. So we have another question here about whether we can use something other than a personal access token to run Azure Pipelines jobs in container apps. This would be a two-part question or two-part answer, and I have to admit I don't have either of these parts. But one would be we need to check whether or not Azure DevOps, or Azure Pipelines, the agent itself can take something other than a PAT, and I don't know that off the top of my head. And the other is we need to see whether or not the Kata scaler for Azure Pipelines can take something other than a PAT. So if either of these require a PAT, I think we're pretty much stuck using it. So yeah, we'll need to look into this a little bit more. Can't really give you an answer here. If you want to ask the question either in our Discord or maybe in our GitHub issues, maybe we can look into this a little bit more for you. And this one here is about an ingress. Like Mike was saying, we did Carrie as our networking expert, and he's not here today. So this is another one that would be good to get some of the details that, like, the parts that you're struggling with, and getting those in maybe a GitHub issue, and then we can find the right people to help you out.
The one thing I was on mute. Sorry. The one thing I might mention on that last question is, can you actually put that back up? Sorry, Anthony. I wasn't fast enough on the unmute button. So Ren, you mentioned you're using consumption-based container apps. One thing is the new workload profile environment, which is GA, by the way, and we'll see that in the demo here. That gives you a lot more networking flexibility. So if it's possible for you to switch now that we're GA, that's probably going to help you a lot. But still, what Anthony said is reach out on our Discord, which would be, I think, the best place for kind of, if you want like an interactive Q&A Discord's definitely the place to go. You're welcome to create an issue. Typically, that's not where you want that Q&A. The lag time is a little more. We have people daily that are poking through the Discord to try to answer questions quickly. So these kind of questions are great for Discord. If it turns into kind of a real issue that we need a potential bug fix or feature add, then the issues are great. And if I misspoke there, either of you, let me know. But that's how I feel. And I am sending, there's the link to our Discord. Oh, Anthony, it's in our chat. I'm sorry, I don't have access to the public chat. But I don't know if you want to put up our Discord link there.
Yeah, I'll show a way to get there.
Okay.
So
awesome.
if we go to github.com/Microsoft/Azure Container Apps, Azure-Container-Apps. I might have a link here somewhere. Let's see. We have lots of links. So I think it's this AKA link. So once you get there, you can go to our issues to ask questions. Or if you go to the README down here, there is a link to join our Discord. And that's, as Mike said, that's probably the quickest way to try to get an answer to something that you might be struggling with.
Yeah, but again, on that networking one, the dedicated, the Workload Profiles environment, which just went GA, is going to be a better, more flexible environment for use going forward. So if at all possible, upgrade, Ren.
Great. All right, so let's keep the questions coming. Right now, we're going to jump over to our demos. Let's see if I know how to do this. All right, so so there was a few things that were like as Sophia kind of mentioned. We shipped a lot of things in August. So we're going to focus on a couple in the demos today. So one is jobs. We're going to create some jobs, kind of look at some jobs in container apps. And we're also going to talk about the workload profiles and some of the changes there. So I think to begin with, I'll kind of go over the new job creation experience in the Azure portal. So to find it, you can just search for jobs and choose container app jobs. And then here, you just click the create button. And we can create a job. So let me just choose a region here. So it looks a lot like the creation process for a regular container app, including the selection of the different environment types. Mike, do you want to jump in and talk about these?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes. As we've mentioned a couple times, consumption only, that's the only environment type up till now that we've offered. And kind of as the name states, you can only run consumption-based apps, which are great. Consumption-based billing model basically allows you to run your apps, and you can have them scale all the way to 0. So if you're not receiving any traffic after a little bit of time, and the app is not processing any background jobs, so basically it's sitting there and doing nothing, it is scaled to 0. And at that point, it's absolutely free for that app to sit there and wait for traffic. So if it's a kind of app that doesn't get a lot of traffic all the time, the consumption plan is great. Now, here's the beauty of the new plan we have, the Workload Profiles environment type. I mentioned we have a dedicated plan, which is new. And then we still have the consumption plan, which is awesome. And for the scenario I just talked about, scale to 0, only pay for what resources using while your app is running. By the way, you don't have to scale to 0. That's just an option to potentially save money. You can also have your app scale to like a minimum count. What we say is scale to idle. So in the consumption plan, you can also scale to idle, which might be one instance of your app. It's much cheaper when your app basically scales to idle. Again, it's not doing anything, but we don't shut it down. So there's no penalty to start it back up when that first transaction or event hits your app. So you have both those options in the consumption plan. Again, the workload profile environment type, that's our new environment type. It supports both of those. So in one environment, you can continue to use the consumption plan and that billing model that I just described, just the way you are today in the current environment. But you then also have access to this new dedicated plan with some additional workload profiles, and we'll show that in a moment. So yeah, there's no reason, in my opinion, not to choose the workload profile environment. It gives you a more modern networking capabilities that I've talked about. It gives you the consumption plan that is absolutely free when your apps are not running, just like in the other one. But it also allows you to grow into workload profiles, some of the dedicated workload profiles that we'll talk about here in a moment. So choose that button. It's going to be the default button very soon. So choose that button, please.
And Mike, I've got a question.
I love it.
When we had our announcement for like the updates of the smaller subnets and such, and if I want to use a smaller subnet in a consumption setting, I have to select a workload profile, correct? That's I'll use the consumption plan within a workload profile, and that will give me access to the UDR and the smaller subnets and all that stuff.
That's all that more modern, flexible VNet or networking stuff. All of that comes with the workload profile environment. Mm-hmm. So if you're creating a new environment, there really is no reason to not select the workload profile that I can think of. And in fact, maybe, Anthony, could you click on workload profiles and we just kind of knock that out while we're talking about the difference? So when you choose that environment type, you'll see here by default, hang on one second, Anthony, you'll see by default, you get a consumption workload profile with now supports up to 4 CPUs and 8 gig for each app. So we've actually increased the size there. So here you have that consumption workload profile, which is using the consumption plan. If you have no apps in your environment, it's totally free. If your apps scale to 1 or 0, it's either cheap or free. And your apps can scale to very large number of replicas, like we said. But each app is still required to be using 4 CPUs and 8 gig or less. What adding a workload profile does for you, thank you, Anthony, you're awesome. We'll give it a name. And then the critical thing here is you get to choose the size. Thank you. Yeah. And here you'll see you have currently today, you have 2 different options. You have what we call our general purpose choices for workload profiles. But then you also have memory optimized. And you can see some of those memory optimized go up to some massive gigabytes of RAM, all the way up to 256 with 32 CPUs. A couple of things to note here. It looks expensive and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to run one app and you're going to charge me that much per month. Well, no, you can put as many apps as you want into a workload profile, as many apps that will fit at least. So if you were to grab, say, the dedicated E16, because you have some memory intensive workloads that load some ML models or just large files that need to be in memory, you will have 16 CPUs and 128 gigs of RAM, and one of your apps might take a ton of memory, and then a few others might take just a little bit of memory. So you may end up putting 4, 5, 6, 8 apps into this one instance of one of these E16 sizes. So this just gives you a lot of flexibility, and you can combine it with the consumption so that, think about your microservice environment or your microservice solutions. Yeah, we can go ahead and select that, Anthony, if you want. This allows you to put each service that's part of your micro into the best fitting environment or compute that you need. So maybe your front ends, you go ahead and put in consumption because they're not always getting traffic, but some of your back end APIs that get traffic, not just from the front end, but from other event driven things, those are using a ton of memory. Maybe you put those into what Anthony has nicely called the mic workload profile. And if you go ahead and do this, You will then see when you schedule a job, and I'll stop here, but in a minute, Anthony will show you where you get to choose. Well, there it is. You'll see that you can now choose for this job, and it's the same for an app, a container app. You get to choose which workload profile you want to use. So yeah, very flexible with some large sizes. And remember, there are some billing differences. You're paying for the whole instance, whether you put one app or 12 apps in that instance of a workload profile. So that's a key difference. But if you're running at scale, it can actually be beneficial to you pricing wise once you get to a certain scale, which isn't massive. So don't think it has to be hundreds or thousands of instances. It doesn't at all. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Anthony. And Anthony, if you have any questions as you go, just holler.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right. So we saw how we could create a workload profile. We selected the workload profiles environment. So now let's continue creating a job. So a job can be manual, scheduled, or event-driven. So you can see the options here. If you select schedule, we can actually enter a cron expression, or we can choose event-driven. So we can actually fire off jobs as like events occur. So whether these are messages showing up in a queue or a new job that needs to be processed in Azure pipelines. So here, it looks just like creating a container app. So I'm not going to go through a lot of that. You can go and choose your container from a registry. And then, as we were looking at before, you can choose between the consumption workload profile, which would be pretty much exactly the same as running it in consumption today, or using the dedicated workload profile that we created earlier.
Would you mind, Anthony, would you mind just choosing that for a moment, the Mike workload profile? Wish you wouldn't have named it that. And I just wanted to point out, here's where, as I said, you don't have to use that whole workload profile instance, which is large. You get, for this specific app, you can choose how much memory and CPU. As you can see, Anthony loves the sliders. This would allow you to maybe, like I said, put 4, 5, 6, 8 apps into a single instance of a workload profile. Something we didn't talk about, it was kind of hidden, not hidden. It was kind of on that last screen when we created a workload profile. These workload profiles themselves can scale. So if you put a bunch of apps into a workload profile and they don't all fit in one, it'll scale to a second instance or a third. And you can control the limits of that scaling so you can control your costs. So anyways, yeah, thanks, Anthony, for showing how that works. That's a lot of memory. That's a lot of memory for a job, right? Wow. Wow.
Yeah, building off of what Mike said, I think one of the selling points of workload profiles is that it gives you a lot of predictability and stability in your what you're paying. So you can set your limits of how many instances, and you know that you're paying this much for this period of time. And you can still do that within a consumption thing, like for per app, you can have scale limits, but like at an environment level, when you're managing all of your apps, you can see, hey, this is the amount of memory and cores that I want to use and want to set aside. And these are the limits, and this is what I want to pay for. Yeah.
That's a great point, Sophia, because often we talk about, hey, you can use bigger apps with more memory and gigs of memory and CPUs. But what you said, the cost containment and control over the costs is really nice to have. And the fact, again, you can save money when you're running at scale and you're not relying on scale to zero. Dedicated workload profiles is the way to go. And reach out if you have more specific questions about what that means. I'm happy to chat with you. I had one more thing, Anthony, a job. So
right. Okay.
First of all, well, jobs is amazing. I think it really fills a little gap that we had. When I have something I need to run periodically, event driven, whatever, like you said, and it can run to completion and then it's done. And that's awesome. That wasn't exactly how we had container apps designed. So this is a great addition to the container app family. But I did have a question about the dedicated workload profile, and it slipped my mind now. I'll remember it. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, because I have a bit of a demo to cover anyway.
Okay,
So
I'm done.
maybe I'll come back. Cool. So I'm not actually going to go and create a job here because it does take a couple minutes. But for an event-driven job, you can set how many executions that you want per polling cycle of the scaler. So what happens is that we evaluate the scaling rule that you set up every 30 seconds or so. You can actually configure that. And then the result of that is how many jobs are going to start. So this maybe the scaling rule is looking at a queue, and it sees that there are 30 messages on the queue. And you can configure that to start 30 jobs when it sees that. So that's how you can configure an event-driven job. So I already have a job created. I'll actually kind of go through some examples of jobs. So in previous live streams, I think a couple of months ago, we went through how to do an event-driven job, basically dropping like a URL of a video file into a queue, and then having a job pick that up and transcribe it using OpenAI Whisper into basically like the transcript of what's spoken in the video. We also had Anand from the Container Apps engineering team come on here and show us how we can use how we can set up event-driven jobs to act as self-hosted Azure DevOps agents as well as GitHub Actions runners. So I forgot which month that happened. So go back in our previous episodes to check those out. And today I want to show you a couple more ways you can use jobs in container apps. So the first one here, I have a very simple, basically like a node application that uses Playwright, and it's just going to the Playwright website and just clicking around basically. And that is so it's basically going through to basically opening up the Playwright page and then clicking on the Get Started link and then clicking on the library link and the API link. And each time we're actually setting a performance marker. So we're actually measuring how long it's taking to load those pages. And then I pulled in the Application Insights SDK. And at the end of this, what I'm doing is that I'm emitting an availability telemetry to Application Insights. So you can imagine this job running either manually or as a scheduled job. So say every 5 minutes, it's actually going to the website, clicking around and sending the telemetry to Application Insights. So you can see whether or not your application is running, as well as how long each page is taking. So I've already deployed this to container apps. So you can see I have a job here that is scheduled to run every 5 minutes. So, and then if I actually click over here to the execution history, you can see that it's been running throughout the day. And if I go over to my application insights and I refresh, you can see that it's actually mapping out like each one of these dots is an execution of that test. So you can actually see that throughout the day, the Playwright website actually has different performance throughout the day. And then you can actually click in and look at one of these data points, and then you can actually see the per page time that I've recorded from basically the telemetry that we're emitting. And we can also go and actually grab this out. So if we go over to logs and we run this query, you can see that we've actually graphed it out. So you can actually do a lot from just a job using Playwright and hitting a website. So you can see a lot of these, combining a lot of these pretty cool technologies and services in Azure to do something hopefully kind of useful. So that's one. So that's one example of how you can use jobs in container apps, and that's specifically for a scheduled job.
That's really cool how you use Playwright to kind of keep track of your performance of your site. Because we have like liveness probes, which can say, yeah, it's alive. But this is really great because it's alive, but performance isn't what it was yesterday or earlier. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a good example of what you can do with Playwright, and just literally it's like having a user click around on your site every few minutes just to make sure everything's going well. Cool. And the next example is actually one that that we're going to show in depth in Pamela Fox and my session at on a Python Day in a couple of days on Thursday. So this is a quick preview of that. We're actually going to go into details about how you can build an interactive kind of a chat agent kind of application for your enterprise. So what you're seeing on the screen here is kind of like the front end of it. And what we've done is we've actually loaded a bunch of like fake, human resources, HR kind of documents into Azure Search, Azure Cognitive Search, and we actually use OpenAI and all this other stuff that Pamela would be much better at explaining. But we basically ingested a bunch of that information into Azure Cognitive Search, and now we can actually use chat to query that data. So, for example, we can ask a question, and then you'll actually go and query the documents in chat or in Cognitive Search and come back with an answer. It's actually pretty cool. And so this is all built using container apps. So, and I can ask it a question, what is Azure Container Apps? You can see that it doesn't know anything about container apps yet. So, so what we wanted to do was actually like, let's create a web UI so you can actually upload a document and then actually have it ingested into Azure Search, and then have that information exposed through this chat. So to do that, I've done a couple of things. So the first thing is, this is actually a repo that's already in Azure Samples. And we'll, like I said, we'll kind of share the updated version of it for container apps in a couple of days at Python Day. But this is a sort of like a preview of it. So there are quite a few things in this repo, but one is currently there's a Python script that you can run, and you can pass it a bunch of parameters, and it's actually you can actually use it to load a file and have it sort of chunked out and indexed into Cognitive Search. And this is currently expected to be run, locally on your desktop, or somewhere in GitHub Actions or something somewhere. So we've gone ahead and actually created a Docker file for it, and now we've deployed this as a container app job. So this is being currently deployed as a manual job, and so now every time you run this manual job, you can actually configure it to process a file. And then the second thing that we put together is I created like a really basic front end for uploading a file. And here, what we're doing is I'll kind of show you the front end in a little bit. Actually, no, I'll show you that here now. It's the most basic front end for uploading a file that I think anyone can build, and I've built that here. So when you choose a file and you click upload, actually maybe I'll do that now, and then I'll go over the code after. Press upload. Hopefully it's going to work for a bit. So while that's working, I will. So what I did is I basically went to the Container Apps documentation. On the very bottom, there's actually an export as PDF. It actually exported out like a 600-page PDF file of all the Container Apps documentation. So I just uploaded that to this job. So this is the web part of it. So so the part that I wanted to kind of show you here is when I click that button, what I've done in some Python code using the Azure Container Apps Management SDK is that I got the template, like basically got the current state of the job. So this is how the job was defined. And then I modified the blob URL to the URL that I just up the file that I just uploaded. And I'm also modifying the file name for the log as well. And then I'm with a single call here, I'm able to start the job. So this is the job that's running. You can see that it's actually running. And that container app that we just saw there has managed identity enabled, and that managed identity has access to the job. That's why it's able to talk to the job and start it. So you can actually see the job running now as like that. We're seeing that Python script running as a job, and you can see the output being shown on the screen here. I think
That is
it's
a
pretty
lot of
much done.
pages.
That's a lot of pages. Yeah, and there's actually other documentation on Azure that has even more. I think Azure Functions has like 2,000. I've tried that in here as well. It runs a little long, which is why I
Oh,
didn't use that
wow.
as a demo. But yeah, it all works. So it looks like it's done. So now I'm going to go back to this chat and ask it about container apps. What is Azure Container App? Hopefully, this time you'll know the answer. Does it? Look at that.
Wow, that's awesome.
And this is yeah. So we didn't plan for this, but do either of you have a question that you want to ask about container apps? It doesn't have to be something that you think you'll get a good answer for, but like literally anything.
Do we support? Does Container Apps support sticky sessions? Since we just had an announcement on that, it'd be fun to see.
All right, let's see. This is unplanned, so no idea if this is going to work. Look at that.
Yeah. Nice.
Dang. And I also have to mention that this is currently all the processing is being run as part of the job. So how it's parsing the PDF and all of that. So we're not actually calling out to form recognizer, which that script is actually capable of, as well as calling out to OpenAI to kind of do some of the, I don't even know how to describe it because Pamela knows all this stuff. I actually turned those off. So I think you would actually get even better results if you actually turn those on. So yeah, so like this chat is super cool. You can actually go and install that today off of Azure Samples and feed it your own files, and then have it be an internal kind of a chat agent for your company. So, so yeah, like I said, join us for Python Day. So we're going to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll bring Hailey on to talk about Python Day. How about that?
Love it.
Let's take a quick look here. I think I saw some questions.
Great couple of jobs demos there, by the way, Anthony.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so we have a question here about what's the difference between timed functions and a timed job. I think the main part of it is how you kind of run it. So for so you're actually using the Azure Functions programming model, you would basically, write a timer triggered function and basically put all your code into that function, and it's going to run. And for a time, basically a scheduled job in container apps, it could be really any executable or any kind of script that you might have. Basically, for .NET, you would just create a console app. For Python, you would just create a script. Same thing with Node. It's really basically anything that you can execute. So you don't have to follow any programming models. As long as you can build a container out of it, we can run it. And then and then it's going to fire based on the on the schedule. So there are some slight differences. The cron expressions that we use between container apps and functions is different. Functions supports seconds. If you want to fire a job every 5 seconds, you can. For container apps, the lowest granularity is a minute. And I think there's some nuanced behavior between how overlapping schedules are run. I believe container apps will just keep kicking out these containers every X number of minutes that you've kind of set it to run. Whereas I think functions will only run one at a time. So there's some slight differences there that you might want to look into. But for the most part, it's just really how you write or build the job. There isn't a right or wrong way. It's just kind of what you prefer.
And one reason you might use one over the other might just because you've already got a container apps environment and other container apps, and it might just make sense to add a job to that same environment versus switch over to a different service. And, so it might just be what you're already using or what you're planning to use. So they're both great solutions, depending on what you need and what you're using.
Yeah, and that's a good point there, Mike. Yeah, so like Mike said, if you're already using container apps, I think it makes sense to use container apps jobs, and also container apps jobs live on the same network as your container apps, so they can actually talk to a like basically call and a container app over the internal network. So say a container app starts the job can actually talk back to it to let it know how it's doing. I'm actually working on a blog post on how you can some patterns of how you can sort of like have jobs communicate back to the app. You kind of saw an example there earlier with the live log showing up. That's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
You can also have the app talking back to, or sorry, the job talking to the app. Cool. And there's a question here about whether container apps is going to replace Azure Functions. Absolutely not. I think both are fantastic products and services, and they're going to basically both continue to grow. We're also going to try to make them work together. So there are some instances where you might want to use the Azure Functions programming model, whether you already have an existing Azure Functions app, or you have or you just want to make use of the Azure Functions model, but you also want to have it live in the same environment as a container app. So you can sort of like pick and choose what you want to use when you create a microservice. One service you might want to use a container app. One service you might want to use a function. So at Build, we kind of announce how you can run those together, and we're going to continue to make those work better together. And actually, in an upcoming show, is that what we call these things? Like in an upcoming live stream, we're going to have Ramya join us from the functions team to talk more about that. Cool.
And just to be a little concrete with what you said, Anthony, and I heard you cutting out. I don't know if others did. These functions are actually running on in a container app environment if you want them to. So, like Anthony said, we're trying to bring the best of both worlds. Container apps gives you some great observability by running inside that environment and some networking capabilities. So bringing the option to run your function on a container app environment really is just best of both worlds, and choose the programming model or not the programming model that you don't want to use with container apps. Again, there's no programming model. Bring your container and we'll run it if it runs on a Linux machine.
Awesome.
Go for jobs. Jobs are awesome.
Yep, that's right. And if you want to learn, like I said, if you want to learn more about how that app is built, how you can deploy it yourself, yeah, please join us on Thursday for Python Day, which Hailey will tell us more about.
Yeah, thank you for pulling me on. I usually sit in the background on these, so I'm starting to come on more and more. But Python Day is this Thursday. It's completely free. It's a full day of Python development and how to use different Azure services to really streamline what you're doing and be more efficient. Yeah, Anthony's pulled up all the site on how to register. It's virtual, and so yeah, feel free to join. All of the information here is listed on this site that I posted below. We got some great sessions on app development, dev productivity, data services, serverless, and AI, because I know everyone's super into AI nowadays.
And container apps.
Container apps, of course. Those are like the themes and the categories that all the services fall under. But yeah, it's this Thursday, September 7th, 2023. Definitely come join us.
Is this appropriate for folks that just want to learn Python for the first time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll have a whole bunch of resources how to get started if you just want to learn what you can do with Python, and then awesome. Link to all the resources and see what else you can do to get started.
Yeah, I asked because my daughter, Sarah, is dying to learn Python, but dying not to learn Python from her dad. So I'm going to send this link to her. Sarah, if you're listening, this link's coming at you. I expect you to be there all day.
And we will block Mike from joining any of the things, so you won't have to listen to him say anything.
That's rough. Seacrest out.
All right, with that, yeah. So I think that wraps up another installment, I guess, of the Azure Container Apps community live stream. Thanks so much for joining us this month. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe and like, and do all those things you're supposed to do on YouTube. So you can catch us against next month. Thanks everyone for joining.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.